Welcome everybody. Today we're going to take a look at the user profile and primarily a bunch of things that we need to take care of in order for the user functionality to work, right? So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, with building a profile page, you need some information about the user. So I'm just going to lay out some really simple foundation, and I kind of already did in the user object by having the name here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just rename it to username. And the part where I specified that when the user is logging in, I might require a username and an email because I want to email be private and username be public, right? So kind of like what you have on Instagram. So for this, let's also go into register.cshtml. And where we had the email here, let's go ahead and require the username as well. So with the username, that's the actual thing that we want to pass here, and let's not forget to specify the email from the form as well. Okay, so there it is. Let's actually put it on one line here. I think on the register CSHTML, let's go ahead and add another field here. We're gonna have username, and I think we can swap these around. One too many. Yep. So there it is, and username and username. Okay, let's just double check the login CSHTML form. So this looks all right. The email here isn't really required. I still want them to log in with username. Email will be for verification purposes. So once that is done, another thing that I want to make sure that I have is in my startup here, there is an option that you can specify on identity for the user that you can have a unique email address, and I want that, okay? And that should be default, so that's for production and development as well. So now that we got that, let's go ahead and close this and go into program.cs. So in here, what we're going to do is we're going to take these and we're going to put them up here because we are going to be working with putting submissions against the users that we create. So I need them to exist before the submissions do, okay? So just clean up this space here and primarily just changing this stuff back to how it was, okay? So email, test, and the rest of the email. Mod, same thing. Email, mod, and add test. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to be able to link users and submissions. Okay, so let's go ahead into our user, and in here we're just going to say that a user is going to have an iList of submission. We're gonna have submissions. Okay, I'll need to delete that and make sure that this is a new list of submissions, so the list is always present there. And because of this, on the submission itself, what we can do is specify the user ID and set the user as well as a navigational property. I doubt we will ever need it, but you know, we'll see what happens. So the user ID, that's a thing that we'll need for the user itself. I'm not sure, but nevertheless, let's go back onto the program. We will take the test user, so let's go ahead and actually just rename him to test user here. Let's grab it, and on the submissions, both of them, we'll say user ID equals test user ID, put the comma on the end, copy this line, and put it over here. So both of these submissions belong to that particular user. Now, the thing that I want to do on the first time that the user tries to get his profile, this profile is going to get initialized. So the user record here is really a user profile, and I think it's actually, I don't want to call it profile. We'll just call it user for all intents and purposes of that. In our API, this resembles a user, and the user information is essentially a profile. Okay, so let's go through the motions first. I don't want to go too much in the UI because we have a lot of ground to cover, but essentially we're going to be using this bit here. So when we first get the user, right, What we want to do first is we want to get the user ID. So in the user, we're going to have a bunch of claims, and we want to get first our default, and particularly what we're going to have are JWT bearer claims. So the type, we want to compare it to JWT claim types. And then here there's going to be a subject claim. Okay. We are going to take the value. We're going to check if it's null right here. Put a semicolon. So this is getting a little bit too big. Let me drop it on one line, right? And if user ID string is null or empty, we want to just go ahead and return bad request because there's no user ID. Now, if we do actually have the user ID, let's go ahead, proceed, and get the user out. So for this, we will need a constructor. In here, let's bring in the app.db context, get the CTX in here, grab the user. So users, first our default, ID equals user ID that's coming in. Okay, we can make this asynchronous. I think that will be all right as well. So wait here, make this a task. Need to import some stuff. Looks like we actually have all the things. So user. So if we have the user, return OK, user, right? Super simple. And this is not JavaScript, so doesn't equal null, then we're good. Otherwise, at the end, we want to initialize the user and, return them. So we'll still be okay here. However, first thing that we want to do is instantiate a new user. So this, every time this should only be visited once and after registration. So the user registers, goes back to our client, we fetch the profile, and that's when we initialize the user. Other than that, all the times it will only hit up to here. Okay, so this isn't going to be reached that many times. And anyway, we want to grab the ID, set it to the user ID, and then we also want the username. And the username is going to be extracted pretty similarly. I will briefly touch on how we get this one. So preferred username, or will I? Actually, no, I won't. Just know that this is the claim that we want to grab, and this is the claim that should be contained in the access token, although it will not be. And I'm not gonna go through the process of showing you how I found out and all of that. If you are interested, look through the source code. But other than that, all I'm gonna say is in the API scope, what I want to do is just include the preferred username in the access token. So the access token that's going to be created, it's going to include the username with which we register, and this username is going to get passed into the user controller, and we can assign it to the user. Okay, so the context, we can go ahead, add the user, and then we can context, say changes async, and all is good. Okay. This is essentially it. Now, because of the future works that are going to be coming along, we will need this function in terms of actually getting the user identifier across multiple controllers. So let's go ahead and create ourselves a new class. We'll call it an API controller, and this will be our controller base. Okay, and for this controller base, this is the part where we're just gonna go ahead, grab this, go to the API controller, and put this here. Okay. So let's go ahead, public string user ID, and we will evaluate this to this. One thing as I'm going to do is I'm going to say private string get claim string claim type, and I'm actually going to evaluate it to this whole thing. Okay, and let's go ahead, get claim. There we go. And in here, we are just going to supply claim types, right? So this is just so we can essentially start inheriting from an API controller. And let's grab this API controller tag and put it on here. Anywhere where we start using API controller, we can slowly migrate it to this one here, and we can start taking advantage of the user ID as well. So as it goes for the username claim, let's go ahead and just put it in here as well. Okay, so username and preferred username, I think, yeah, that's the one. So now what's going to happen is we're gonna have a username, okay, and user ID here as well. So I assign it to a local variable because we sort of use it a couple of times. Reevaluating this enumerable isn't preferable, so just store it in a local variable. Let's set these to protected because it should only be used in the controllers, right? But yeah, other than that, this is looking okay. So closing that, I hope this function is pretty self-explanatory. When we first get the user profile, we instantiate the user, and again, as I mentioned in the previous episode, we are trying to keep the identity user, the authentication session, from the profile of the actual application separate. So this is done for future migration purposes. So if we ever need to split the two, it will not be such a big hassle, okay? As well as perhaps migrating database records as well. So we got this part. The primary part that we don't want to forget is that we assign the user to be on the submissions. So let's actually go into the submissions controller. Let's scroll all the way up here, and what we're going to do is we're going to add an API controller. And let's remove this tag here because the tag already exists on the previous controller. So now what we can do is when we create the submission, we can grab the user ID and set the user ID that comes from our API controller. When this gets updated, yeah, we're not there yet, so I'm not going to touch that one. Now, one thing that is important is that the fact that we have user ID, we actually want to still authenticate, okay? So it's a bit of a bother. What do we put on the authorized attribute? Let's go back into the startup. We're going to scroll back to add local API authentication. And here we're going to take a look at the policy name that is adding. So this one here. Let's go ahead and copy this. We're going to go back into startup and we are going to take a look at our policies here. And instead of the more verbose local API thing, we'll do constant string, and we will point it to this one and we'll just call it user. Okay. Wait. There we go. Do we need that? Okay, yeah. So that's fine. So we're basically just using indirection. So tracking library constant policies, user, regular user, you should be a user to be able to access this. So on the user controller, if we are trying to get me, or I think for any particular user, I think we'll just authorize the whole controller, where we'll just grab tracking library constants, policies, user. Okay, let's go ahead, copy this. We'll go into the submissions controller, and on this create function, let's go ahead and place this here as well, right? And as we're adding user functionality, as we're going through it, we will slowly change stuff bit by bit. Now, that we can actually create submissions for a user, what I want to do is be able to grab a bunch of submissions for a particular user. So this is because the relationship is user, and that user has a bunch of submissions. It's going in the user controller, right? So in here at the bottom, let's go ahead and do something along the lines of this. And yeah, we'll still keep ID, and we'll do submissions, and then get user submissions. Okay, and this is where a little bit of a problem will come along, but we will a problem in the UI, but we'll come exploring it later on. And there are things that we can do to walk around it, and I'll show you the solution that I've come up with, and we will discuss some other things as well. So when we get the submissions, getting the submissions itself isn't really the problem on the back end, because we just grab the context, we go to the submissions, we make sure we include the video, right? So whatever, we had a video here, and then we do where, make sure the user ID equals the ID that we're passing, and then we to list, I think we can do async here. Also, we're accessing the database, we should be, it's a connection. should be asynchronous. It's an external thing, you know. So anyway, enumerable of submission. Make sure we implement the stuff, and I think it's just complaining about the type. And yeah, so turning it to list is fine here. So leaving it at that, I think we can clean up some of the unused imports in the solution. And I think that's about it. So we changed a bunch of stuff on the back end. The next couple of things that I want to sort is going to the front end and making it look pretty, right? Let's close all of this stuff. I'll collapse everything and let's go to the web client, right? So opening the web client, first things first, which can give it a hard refresh. Make sure we got the console open, right? Ready for the errors. The sign in button. After we sign in, that's when I want to, so let's do test password. Let's sign in, we'll close this, and there we go. So first of all, let's go to Viewify. I'm gonna replace that with a menu. Later we'll put icons on there and whatnot, but for now, a simple menu will do. So let's go open up the source code. I'm gonna try to stop blowing into the microphone. Layouts, default, and where we have the profile and the logout, we sort of want to combine it into a menu. So let's go ahead, put the menu here. The VIF on the profile, we'll cut it. We'll put it on the menu itself. The first button, we actually no longer need buttons. We can just go ahead, put the icon here, and then the profile here. Put the name here. We can put it as a list here. It's not that important, to be fair. Yep, for now that will do. MDI account circle for profile. For sign in, let's put this thing here. Let's have the sign out as well. MDI circle outline. Is that, wait, that was the sign in. Hold up. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to grab you, dude. Log out. Let's change this to login because we have asserted our position in what we wanted to use. And the click function itself should be on the logout. So hold up. Yeah, the login. All right. Sign out redirect. I'll do a little overview after this is after this little menu refactoring is over, because I'm already feeling that a little bit confused here. But so let's remove this one. So we got the logout, we got the profile. On the profile, we don't have the page yet, but let's go ahead and use the router, and we'll push to /profile, right? So it's gonna be your profile. For the drop down, let's I think we can just go ahead and use the empty circle account thing. Otherwise, we're gonna display a profile image, which I think we'll get to in the next episode. I'm planning. Okay. Looks okay to me. Let's see if it looks okay here. Let's give this a refresh. The button here is a little bit not depressed. Maybe I've missed out something about how icons are displayed. So profile logout, MDI logout circle. Oh, I just didn't put any text here. So on the left, we don't want it on the left, the button here. We want this button to just be an icon. I think that was it. So now it should just be like a nice little circle. Cool. And yeah, let's grab a materialdesign.com. I'm just gonna grab like a door or something with an arrow, so it's like log out, you know. Log out. Let's take a look. So it's chugging, loading. So I think we can retype this because it didn't reload, or maybe not. Door. Oh my god, it's so laggy. Door. Oh my. Okay. Door open. Sign out. Yeah, I think logout. Okay, so we got literally just logout. So let's just put this here. Logout. Okay. So coming back to our profile, that's essentially what it looks like. So if we need to log out, we're logging out because we bound the, what's it called, the action there, and the profile. We go here 404 no found. Okay, so we got that. We're ready to display the profile. The profile is just going to be a little bit of mock information, and then we want to basically synchronize the submissions, how we are going to get them with the user ID, because that endpoint is a little bit generic because it's not tied to the user. So first we're getting the profile, and then we're going to get the submissions for a particular user. Okay, and let's see the problem that we're going to run into here. So remember that we don't know the user ID on the server side, so we cannot prefetch this stuff. So let's close the default. What we're going to do is we're just going to go into the pages. We're going to create a folder. So directory profile, and let's go ahead and just add a view index. Index view, yeah. So the idea here is that I'm going to reuse this folder later on to display other profiles. But for now, this is just going to accommodate that one user profile. So let's go ahead and get some data in here. It's going to be an arrow function. And the user should have some submissions, okay? Our particular user, our test user, should have some submissions. So for submissions, let's go ahead and have something like a card, and maybe they just have some kind of like pretty looking card that I can like steal for a second. Well, yeah, for a second. I'm not taking it for too long. I need like a user looking card. I think that's okay. I think, yeah, they're just using a list here. So let's go ahead and grab that. We'll keep the title for the avatar here. Or actually, I don't like this. I think we'll just use vcard title, and then we'll use the avatar. So again, this is just super simple scaffolding. We're not doing anything too crazy. And here I'll just put a v-icon, mdi account. I think that was okay. And here we'll say test a user. Okay. And then for, I think it was on the trick ID. Yeah, so we want to grab these submissions. So we're going to have a bunch of submissions, and that's what we want to display. So this is probably going to be its own component as well. But for now, let's just have a vcard text and put this in here. So if we got the submissions, let's go ahead and display them. Let's fix up the IDs here. So we're just going to display the keys. We're missing the video player. Let's go ahead, type the video player in here and make sure that we're bringing it in, right? So we got the component, we got the data. Let's go ahead and load the data, right? So the fetch function for particular pages is only going to be executed first server side, and if we are navigating to that page, it's not going to be executed client side, okay? So the fetch is going to be executed server side, or if we're navigating to it, right? So the first time that we hit it, we actually want to use mounted as a life cycle hook for loading submissions here, okay? So let's go ahead, grab mounted. Let's make it async here. And what we're going to do, we're going to keep it real simple first. So we will need to grab a profile ID. We can grab it from a token, or otherwise, what I will do is I will go first into the store, into auth, and in here, once we have a user, once we know that we're committing a user and we're setting the access token. So once we got the access token, this is when for Nuxtjs can go ahead and get from my API users me, right? So this is when we're getting the profile, and let's actually make sure that I have const profile. So there we go. I will duplicate save user. We'll put profile in here. Profile. Copy this. Place the user profile, and put profile null here. Okay. So we got that. Let's go ahead and commit. Save profile. I'll put profile in there. Okay. So Once the profile is saved, this is when, if I go back to the application, let's go ahead and refresh this. Should be able to go into view, into the commit all states, and profile is a promise. Okay, so I haven't actually awaited on it. Let's go ahead and wait on this, and let's make sure we make this an async function. Okay, I'm gonna control F5 here. Go ahead, commit all of this again. Okay, so now on the profile, we see the ID, and we're gonna use this ID to fetch all the submissions, okay? So we can also alternatively use the username. I'm planning on having all the usernames unique, okay? So for now, we are going to use the user ID. In the future, this might change, okay? And this whole process that I'm about to explain, if a stroke of genius might hit me that I might come up with a different solution or something like that, we might change all of this as well. So let's go ahead, and for now, we'll just make it a little bit raw. We'll go into store, and we're going to go into state, and we are going to grab auth user profile. Yeah, we want auth profile, and let's go ahead and save our const profile. Okay, next thing that we want is this submissions. All right, and all we're doing is from Axios we get, make sure we don't forget the $sign, users, and make a backtext because we need to supply the profile.id, right? So the profile ID is there, and submissions. Cool. This is asynchronous, so we actually want to await on this, formatting this, and right, I think this is more or less done. Let's go ahead and give this a hard refresh, and let's actually navigate to the profile page. So cannot read property ID of undefined. Let's go ahead and just verify that the profile is there. Let's actually just save it. We'll control F5. So I just want to make sure that this isn't an error that we need to solve, but I just want to make sure that I make a connection on what the error is here. So if we go into profile, we commit everything, and we have a profile here. Okay, so the profile in the store, we do not have the profile here. What is the problem? So let's do console log mounted profile, right? And then we're gonna copy this. We're gonna go into auth. We're gonna go here and store auth store profile, and we're gonna log the profile here as well. So let's control F5 here on the profile, and here we are. So you can see that the mounted profile is trying to get the profile before the auth store profile is actually initializing it, right? So how do you synchronize this? If you've been paying attention in the previous episode when we had the issue of in the auth plugin, where we decided to opt in for this version instead of synchronizing through the event and using a watcher, as I slightly noted. And if you didn't understand what that watcher was about, now is your time, right? This is when we're gonna implement that watcher, because this whole initialization issue could be walked around by just returning all the submissions from the user controller for the me endpoint, right? And then if we're browsing submissions for some other user, use their username, because that's going to be unique. However, all those approaches have their own issues as well. What is going to happen around cursoring? Do we, like if we have 100 submissions for the me user, do we load all the 100 videos at the same time, or 20 at a time, or 5 at a time? What do we do when we want sort of pagination implemented? If we're doing it for the user, we still want to kind of prevent the navigation to the user page or the profile page for users that aren't authenticated. So for me, it makes sense to synchronize with the authentication session in the store. If you think otherwise at this point, go ahead and tell me in the Discord or in the comments if you have really thought hard about it. Okay, Otherwise, I'm just going to leave this as malleable and as rough as possible. I'm still going to have a think about it while we attach the user to everything else in our application, which is what it should be anyway. But this whole way of how we're going to get our user and other users' information and their submissions and stuff like that, that is still all going to be up in the air. But just understand that the biggest complexity at the moment for the client is synchronizing with the authentication session, because that only happens on the client side, and things like Nuxtjs middleware and Nuxtjs fetch functions, as soon as we land on the page, they only execute on server side. They do not execute on client side at that point. But otherwise, if we're on some other page and client side, we navigate to that page which has that middleware or that fetch function, that's when it's going to execute again. Okay, so it's just a couple of things that we need to deal with. So here's what I'm going to do. Anything that is going to be relating to trying to get some information from the auth store relating to the user, we're going to wrap it in another function that's going to watch that the authentication session is now initialized correctly, and we're going to do that using promises. Okay, so let's go ahead. Here we have the initialize. After this, let's go ahead and watch user initialized, right? Hope I spelled correctly, and let's actually watch user loaded. So in here, we're going to have some things, and then we're going to have an action. So the action is what we want to perform once the user is initialized, right? So everything is going to be sort of wrapped in this thing. What do we want to check? We want to check if the state, right? So if in our state, if we are loading, we want to start watching, okay? Otherwise, if we are loaded, we know that the user is loaded, right? Because we're no longer loading, this is where we can just return action. And one thing, because this will need to happen asynchronously, what we're actually going to do is we're going to return a new promise, right? And then here it's resolve reject functions. I don't think we're going to be using the reject function, but maybe in case some error happens, but whatever. So instead of return, we have to use resolve, and we just kick off the action still, and whatever the result the action returns, that is going to be the resolved value of the promise, right? So this can be asynchronous as well. So we can put async here and use asynchronous stuff, you know. But anyway, so here we have else. Let's just go ahead and put console log, and I'm just gonna say you can turn these into comments, because the flow of this, like the execution flow, how the code traverses this is the part that could be confusing when you're first implementing these watchers. Otherwise, I mean, do the things that you need to do in order to understand this code, okay? I'm just going to put some console logs, so once we run this code, we understand what is happening. Let's say user loaded, a user is already loaded, getting or executing action. So for starting watch, let's go ahead and actually just put that in the comment, right? So because the user is not loaded, we want to start watching the loading function, okay? Once it's finished loading, that's when we resolve the promise, right? This is essentially that task. This is your C# task. This is your asynchronous programming, okay? It's like basically putting it to sleep until the value is there. So let's go ahead and see how this is going to work. On this, we're going to have a watch function, and the watch function is going to accept 3 parameters, 2 of which we will actually need. So the first thing will be the store. So inside the store, what do we actually want to watch, right? So S will go to auth, and inside the auth store, we want to watch the loading, right? So loading, and then we're gonna have 2 values that are going to be produced out of this: the new value and the old value. We're only interested in the new value. So let's say if new value is negative, right? So if loading is false, that's when we have finished loading. This is when we want to go ahead and resolve the action. Okay, so we're doing the same thing here. So user finished loading, executing action. Right, so start watching, user finished loading, executing action. Cool. So one thing that we actually want to do, store this function here, and we want to ditch the watcher. So this is how you essentially get rid of it. So imagine a kind of like an object that's sort of gonna get how, if you watch my async await video, I'm gonna leave a link for that in the description, how that state machine gets stored in memory and you don't have a reference to it anywhere. It's the .NET managed runtime that has a reference to it. This is kind of the same thing. This promise kind of just gets thrown in there. You don't have like, you can't touch it. And this is the way that you actually tell, right, just actually get rid of that thing that's over there, right? Otherwise, it's going to keep watching your variable for a long time. So if it starts changing, it's going to start running this code. So we just want to, for whatever reason that might run, we just want to prevent that situation altogether. There's one more thing that we will need to check here, and we'll run into that in a second. But for now, let's go ahead and try to use this function, right? In the index here, let me just format all of this. So the thing that we're doing here, let's go ahead and go to this store, and we're going to dispatch for auth watch user loaded. And the action that we're passing can be asynchronous. We can return this. So because, I mean, it's already a promise, so it's going to be awaited. Regardless, let's go ahead and put this stuff in here. And there we go, right? So at this point, this function should only be executed after the loading has finished. Anywhere where we rely on the user profile to be loaded first, we are going to use this function to wrap any logic, okay? And this watch user loaded function should only execute on client side. So process, server, return. Okay. Cool. Let's come back here on the profile. Let's refresh. We got the test user. Let's go ahead and read the logs now on what is happening. So starting watching, user finished loading, executing action, mounted profile, undefined. And we actually have the auth store profile here as well. So I am probably not getting the profile correctly here. And this is then going to mean that the initial link that I made was a little bit incorrect, which I actually would like to correct. So let's go ahead and change this a little bit so we can actually try to navigate to it. So auth profile, it used to work before, but I'm not sure what's happening now. Okay, so now we just get a 404, which is fine. I think I just missed the S. Otherwise, let's check the user's controller. So submissions, yep. So now that should more or less do it for us and get submissions, and there it is, right? So we got the submissions to display for our user. Let's go again and revisit the link with the one that I missed. So because now that I've introduced the part where the actual error was that the auth profile was unreachable, now we just want to double check that indeed the original error existed in the first place, right? So we're gonna reload this, and here we go. So mounted profile is null. That is still triggering the first time. So the error now is the actual error we're fixing, not the fact that we can't find the property, okay? So let's go ahead and bring this back here. And there we get, right, submissions. The thing that we are wanting to execute after the user is initialized is inside this function. So now that we got this part, let's go ahead and make sure that an unregistered user cannot visit this, right? So let's go ahead, go to profile, and here we go, right? So we are back in this weird loop again, but however, now what we're doing is we are, let's take the auth store, we're reaching this even though we're not authenticated. So this is the part where I'm just gonna go ahead and say, if we're not authenticated, redirect to the authentication screen, right? So what I'm going to do is go to getters. I'm going to get my getters on the if getters authenticated, right? If not authenticated, else if, right? There we go. And here we can go this. Auth. Yeah, let's move the unwatched up here first. But on the auth, let's sign in redirect. Okay. So again, anything expect a user to be loaded, it will be kind of our guard, just because of how Nuxtjs is not going to let us reliably use middleware and fetch functions on the client side, just because we're relying on server-side rendering. Okay, if this was a full SPA, this wouldn't be a problem. However, for now, to make sure that we are synchronized, we're going to lean on this function here. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what this looks like. So we're on the profile. Let's go ahead and refresh. And the test user appears there just because it's just dummy data, right? But otherwise, this redirects us back. Let's go ahead, use test, password. And one thing you're going to notice, we're not actually thrown back on the profiles page. We are thrown back just on the front page, but that's something that we can handle, right? But anyway, simple profile for now. We're going to display other data on here as well, and probably going to make it a little bit more prettier. However, I just want to note here that I'm going to try to get this project towards completion as much as possible, because at the beginning of the tutorial, I did promise a lot to show all the deployments and setting up the database, and that is still a lot of work. So I just want to get this application in a state of completion as fast as possible and start working on the infrastructure side, okay? But nevertheless, this will be it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, as always, leave them in the comment section or reach out to me on Discord. Please do not DM me. Leave it in the actual channel dedicated to the series. And hopefully, I'll see you in my other episodes.